Stonehenge is the most recognizable prehistoric monument on Earth. Millions of people have stood on Salisbury Plain and looked up at those sarsens, picturing the Neolithic Britons who spent generations hauling, shaping, and raising them nearly 4,500 years ago. It is tempting to imagine those builders as the deep root of British ancestry, the first link in an unbroken chain running down to everyone who lives on that island today. Ancient DNA tells a very different story. The population responsible for Stonehenge does not simply fade quietly into the modern gene pool. Within a handful of centuries of the great stones going up, their genetic signature becomes strikingly rare in the very land they built it on. Something happened on Salisbury Plain, and for a long time, nobody could explain with any confidence what. For most of the 20th century, the story was told as continuity. About 6,000 years ago, farming communities crossed from continental Europe into Britain, carrying crops, livestock, and an ancestry ultimately tracing back to Anatolia, in what is now Turkey. Genetic testing shows these early farmers were closely related to Neolithic populations in Iberia, suggesting a Mediterranean route into the island rather than the river valley route through Central Europe. They spread across the island, raised causewayed enclosures and long barrows, and by around 3000 BC had dug the first circular earthwork at Stonehenge. Centuries later, around 2500 BC, their descendants undertook something extraordinary. Hauling sarsen stones weighing up to 25 tons from the Marlborough Downs, and smaller bluestones from the Preseli Hills of Wales, over 150 miles away, to raise the monument recognized worldwide today. It was presented reasonably as the achievement of one enduring people, refining their island home across 2,000 years. Then, in the 2000s, geneticists began sequencing whole genomes from skeletons across this exact stretch of British prehistory, comparing people buried mere centuries apart rather than millennia. What they found did not resemble gradual change within a single population. It resembled discontinuity. Y chromosome lineages common among the earlier Neolithic burials were almost entirely absent from the later ones. Mitochondrial lineages passed down the maternal line showed the same break. This is not the pattern researchers expect from ordinary demographic drift or the slow adoption of new customs from close neighbors. When a population's maternal and paternal threads are interrupted at roughly the same time in the same place, that is not noise. That is a signal, and it demanded an explanation the existing model of Neolithic Britain simply did not have. One explanation, long the dominant view in British archaeology, held that this was cultural diffusion rather than population change. Bell beaker pottery, metalworking, and new burial customs could have spread the way ideas usually do, through trade and imitation, with existing Neolithic communities adopting a new toolkit rather than being replaced by newcomers. This is not a fringe idea. It is close to what the genomic evidence actually shows happened in Iberia, where beaker-style artifacts spread widely with only limited genetic exchange between regions. If Britain worked the same way, no population turnover would be required at all. But the British data will not support that model. Diffusion of ideas does not rewrite the Y chromosome and mitochondrial lineages of an entire island within a few hundred years. Pottery styles can cross a channel. Ancestry does not travel by imitation. A second explanation proposed something narrower. A small, high-status group of migrant men arriving with new metalworking skill, marrying into existing communities, their line spreading through status and preferential reproduction, while the resident population's other ancestry persisted underneath, mostly unseen. This has genuine precedent elsewhere in Bronze Age Europe, but it runs into the same wall from the opposite direction. If only elite men had arrived, Britain's maternal lineages should have stayed largely continuous with the Neolithic population beneath them. They did not. New mitochondrial haplogroups, essentially unseen in earlier British burials, appear at high frequency right alongside the new paternal ones. Women arrived too, in comparable numbers. Whatever happened on Salisbury Plain, it was not a small band of men marrying in. It looked like whole communities changing places. The clearest answer arrived in 2018 when population geneticists Iñigo Olalde and David Reich led a large international team through a genome-wide analysis of 400 prehistoric Europeans published in the journal Nature. Comparing Neolithic and Beaker period skeletons across Britain, they found that Beaker-associated migrants, carrying high levels of ancestry from the Eurasian steppe by way of the Lower Rhine, had replaced roughly 90% of Britain's gene pool within a few hundred years, maternal and paternal lineages alike, one of the most dramatic population turnovers yet documented anywhere in Europe's ancient DNA record. Exactly why it happened so completely here, when the same Beaker-culture spread through Iberia without any such turnover, is a question researchers are still working through. Think about a house that has stayed in careful hands for centuries. Trace the biological line of everyone who ever lived there, and you will not find one unbroken bloodline from founders to present occupants. Families marry out, move away, die without heirs, while new families move in, add a room, replace a roof, plant a garden the original builders never imagined. Yet the house is still, meaningfully, the same house, carrying forward something none of its residents could hold on to alone. Something close to that happened at Stonehenge. Within a few centuries of the sarsens going up, the people tending the site were, in the main, no longer biologically descended from the people who raised them. And they kept building anyway, rearranging the bluestones into new patterns, cutting a ceremonial avenue down to the river, and centuries later, carving images of bronze axes into the sarsens themselves. The builders changed. The devotion to the place did not, and that makes the achievement no less theirs, no less real. What ancient DNA keeps demonstrating at Stonehenge and at site after site across Europe is that no population story has just one origin point. Identity here was never a single unbroken line handed down from the first builders. It was a sequence of arrivals, each absorbed into or absorbing whatever already stood on that ground, with the landscape itself the only truly continuous thing. There is one detail from this research that rarely makes the headlines. 3 miles from Stonehenge, in 2002, archaeologists uncovered the grave of a man who died around 2300 BC, buried with more objects than any other grave from that period yet found in Britain, including the earliest gold objects ever discovered in the country. Isotope analysis of his teeth showed he had grown up not in Britain, but in the Alpine region of Central Europe. He is known today as the Amesbury Archer, his remains on permanent display at the Salisbury Museum, and he arrived only a few generations after the sarsens went up. A second, younger man buried just beside him turned out, in DNA published in 2022, to be not his son, as long assumed, but a more distant kinsman, born in Britain, yet himself raised partly in the Alps before returning home to die in his 20s. Movement in both directions within one family at the exact hinge point this whole story turns on. A monument only survives as long as someone is willing to keep believing it means something, and by that measure, the people who inherited Stonehenge without inheriting the blood of the people who built it may be the strongest proof of what it was actually built for. If this is the kind of detail that never made it into the textbooks, subscribing means you will not miss the next monument whose real story turns out to be stranger than the plaque outside it. And if this changed how you picture the people who once stood on this exact plain, a like helps it find someone still picturing the old version.